Hey, it's Dr. Guerrero. I just wanted to give you some guidance on the write-ups that you have due, the 4 of them. So you're going to write them up in your composition book, but you're copying them from your lab manual. Okay. So there are going to be 4 that you are doing for this next round, all due at the same time. All right. So when you open your composition book from the beginning, you're going to be doing numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the tabs that you are doing 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so it tells you like tab 2 should say 4.2, 5A1, 5B2, 5C1. Those should be the tabs that you're adding to your composition book. Remember that all of the stuff that you write up has to be in this lab format that you created. Remember, you put all of this in your composition book at the beginning of the term, okay? Remember, in between each lab, you're skipping pages. So, and I'm going to direct you on what to write. But for 2, then you only write on the fronts of the pages. You cannot write on the backs, all right, as you're copying. But there is a lot to copy for this. So I want to go ahead and give you guidance so that you can get it going, and then maybe put in your AirPods and stream something on Netflix while you copy from your lab manual into your composition book, okay? Again, you're going to be adding 4 tabs. 4 tabs. So I am going to share a Word document so I can kind of explain to you how to format it. Okay. All right. So our first tab, okay, it's going to be tab 4.2. So I'm going to write that tab 4.2. That'll be on the side. Then you need to have the title of the lab. So lab 4.2 starts on page 23 in your lab manual. Okay, so I'm going to just put in parentheses, reference page 23 in lab manual. All right. Again, following our required format, the required lab format, okay? You put the title across the top. It just makes sense to me to use the same title. If you want to change it, you can, but it already has a title. It's called the Regulation of pH. All right. Then, following the lab format, the very first thing you do is Roman numeral 1. You write the word problem or colon. Make sure it is underlined. And then you're going to write a problem, okay? There are a couple aspects of this lab that you're required to put in your own words. So the problem and the hypothesis for each of these labs is one of them. So the problem you'll put in your own words, okay? And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Roman numeral 2 is the hypothesis. This will also be in your own words. Roman numeral 3 is materials. Materials need to be listed, and you can just copy these directly from the lab manual. Page 23. Make sure they're listed. So like, for example, you would put plastic tray, 5 100 mLs. You see where I'm going with this, okay? So that's materials, and you can just copy those directly. All right. Roman numeral 4 is the procedures. These will also need to be listed. In this lab manual, the procedures start on page 24 directly. Good grief. And for this first lab, 4.2, just so you know, there are 17 steps. Copy them all. Don't shorthand it. anything like that. Again, remember, you cannot write on the backs of the pages, so fronts only. Okay, so procedures, copies all 17 of them. Then the next Roman numeral 5 is data. Okay, and there are already data tables for you, because remember at the beginning I told you this needs to be a table, chart, graph, something visual. Okay, you can copy table 4.3 and figure 4.4. Okay, and just to be perfectly honest with you, some of you are going to draw it, and that's fine. Some of you could take pictures and print it with your phone and then just cut it out and paste it. So again, that is table 4.3, table 4.3, 4-3, sorry, and figure 4.4. Okay, and so those are the two data tables. Again, you don't have to create it from scratch. They're already there, so just use those. Okay, Roman numeral 6 is questions. Remember, it needs to be underlined and be followed with a colon. Okay, and what's awesome for you is that like number 16 on page 25 is already a question, so you can just use that question. The question is, which fluid, water or milk, is more likely to contain buffers? Okay, then you do not have to answer this question, but you do have to provide an area for it to be answered. So you have to have an area for it to be underlined. Okay, the Roman numeral 7 is conclusion, and you just have to have an area for the conclusion to be written. You do not have to write the conclusion. Okay, we'll come back later and do this. All right, so this is guidance on the very first of the 4 that you need to write out. Okay, regulation of pH in this lab, we're going to use different chemicals, and you'll read that as you read through the introduction on page 23. You'll read that we're going to use orange juice, vinegar, milk, and water. And so it explains what we're going to do. We're going to test the pH. So we're going to test the concentration of hydrogen ions if we're connecting that to lecture. So what you need to come up with in your own words, okay, is a problem. And I'm going to give you an example for this one, but you cannot use this example. Like, does milk have a acid or basic pH? Okay, but you could go along something like that. It doesn't even have to be something that you're going to specifically test, but it needs to have something to do with pH and that what we're dealing with in the lab. Okay, and then your hypothesis is your response to that. Like, my hypothesis is yes, it does, or no, it doesn't have this type of pH, or whatever. Those two need to be in your own words. Okay, again, I've given you a lot of guidance on most of this is just copying it and formatting it. Okay, so now let's go to tab 5B1 or 5A1. I apologize. 5A.1. Okay, and then that is going to reference page 27 in lab manual. All right, now pH is the first lab. The next 3 that you're copying and that we're going to be doing are going to be, we're going to take a whole bunch of food and we're going to test all of the foods for carbohydrates. And then we're going to test all of the foods for lipids. And then we're going to test all of the foods for proteins. Okay, so what we're doing is we're testing for macromolecules. Remember, the 4 macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. But we will not be testing for nucleic acids. Okay, so The first lab that you're going to do, that you're writing up, is tab 5A1, okay? And that technically 5A1 specifically is on page 29. You're not writing up all of lab 5A, you're just doing 5A1. So the title, the title is test for sugars using Benedict's solution. That's the title, okay? So test for sugars tells you we're testing for carbohydrates. Hopefully you remember that sugars are carbohydrates. So the indicator that we're going to use to test for sugars is Benedict's, okay? And so that's what that is talking about. So the chemical that we're going to use to test is the Benedict's solution. We're going to put that in these foods to see if they have these sugars, all right? So my first thing is the problem, and that needs to be underlined, my fault. Problem. And that again needs to be in your own words. Okay, followed up by the hypothesis. Also in your own words, okay? Again, I've kind of discussed what we're doing, so you're able to write your problem or hypothesis based on that, okay? Then the next is your materials. This you can copy directly from page 28. And remember, they need to be listed. Okay. Then your procedures. Again, that needs to be underlined. You will copy those from page 29. And there are only 5 steps in this lab. Okay. And data is our next section. And you just need to copy table 5.1. That's on page 29. Then you have your questions. And remember, you have to have the question. If I were you, I would just copy the question on the bottom of 29. And remember, you have to provide an area to answer, and it has to be underlined. Your answer always has to be underlined. Okay. Then the last part is the conclusion. And you don't need to write the conclusion because you are not doing these labs at home. You are only writing them up because we're going to do them in class, okay? So just an area for that, all right? Again, each of these labs so far, we've talked about the first 2. Each of them gets their own tab, okay? So like 4.2, then 5A1, everybody gets their own tab. And in between each lab, you are skipping 3 blank pages, and you're not writing on the backs of your pages, okay? All right, continuing to the next tab. And if you've already caught the flow, perfect, you can stop the video. And if not, then just hang on, all right? Our next tab is tab 5B2. So tab 5B2. B2 starts on page 31. All right. I would use the title as it's provided, Sudan 4 test. Just so you know, in Sudan is the indicator that we use to test for lipids. So when you see Sudan 4, and that's just a Roman numeral 4, we're testing whatever this is for lipids, okay? So Roman numeral 1, the problem. Again, remember this is in your own words. Then Roman numeral 2 is the hypothesis, also in your own words. The materials are Roman numeral 3, and you are able to copy these directly from, it's the same, they are exact same materials from up here, literally for each of these labs from page 28. So you're just going to copy those materials over and over again. And again, this is boring. It doesn't require a lot of thought, but it does require time. So just do it and get it right. Okay. The procedure. These need to be listed, and it starts on page 31 and ends at the top of page 32. And just so you're aware, I believe there are 4 steps. Yep. Okay. Then you need data. And you can just copy table 5.3 on page 32. Then questions. You guys have definitely lucked out so far. I would just use the question. There's 2 that are there. Just pick one of the ones on page 32. Oh, I don't like that. That's underlined. Copy the question from page 32. And then remember, you don't have to answer, but you do have to leave a blank for the answer, and it needs to be underlined. The last aspect is conclusion. Again, you do not need to write the conclusion, but you do have to have an area for that conclusion to be written. Okay. So there's that. So far, I've given you guidance on the first 3. You still have 1 more to do. Remember that each of these is done separately. So there's not a continuation or a run-on. Each of them gets their own tab, and you're writing on the fronts of the pages only, not the backs, and you're skipping 3 blank pages in between each lab. You don't have to fill any of the conclusions or anything in because you're not doing the lab, but you do have to have a space for it. And also, please don't neglect these parts that are supposed to be in your own words, because you get graded on these when you bring them to class to submit them. And if a lot of students in the past have just not wanted to do that part, so they leave it blank, and that's where the majority of your points come from. So just please make an attempt to come up with the purpose of the problem. Okay, I'm gonna go to 1 more page. The last tab will be tab 5C1. And this begins on page 33. Okay, so the title, and I'm going to scroll down. The title is Test for Proteins Using Burette Reagent. Okay, so in this part of the lab, we're going to be testing these foods for protein. And in order to test them for protein, we are going to use, it's called Burette reagent or Burette reagent or Burette reagent. Okay, so this is the chemical that we're going to use to test if these foods have proteins. Roman numeral 1 is my problem. Remember that this needs to be in your own words. Your hypothesis, also in your own words. The materials, just like the previous ones, you are copying the exact same materials from page 28. Okay. Roman numeral 4 is procedures. And these do also need to be listed. They are on Copy directly. Page 33, there are 4 steps. So again, this is a short one in comparison to the first one that was 17 steps. Okay, then you have your data. That needs to be underlined. And you can copy table 5.4 on page 33. Questions? Needs to be underlined. This is the only one that doesn't have a question already given for you, so you're going to need to create one in your own words. It doesn't need to be underlined. Create a question, and then you'll provide an area for the answer, but you do not have to answer it. Okay. Then the last section will be the conclusion. And you do not need to write the conclusion, but you do need to provide a space for a conclusion to be written. Okay. I'm just going to go through one more time and say it because I don't want it to be missed. Anywhere on here where it says in your own words, make sure you take the time to write something there. Do not leave it blank. Okay. The majority of this lab can be copied directly, word for word. Each of these 4 labs gets their own tab. Okay. You are not going to the store to buy these materials to do these experiments at home. We are going to do these experiments in the lab, but you are going to be graded on your composition book write-ups. Okay, so you need to have them all 4 written up to turn in at the beginning of lab. All right. So it's starting from the top. Tab 4.2, and I give you specifics on that. The second lab you're going to write is 5A1. Again, specifics on that. The third tab you're going to write is 5B2. And then the fourth tab is 5C1, the specifics on all of those. I truly appreciate your work and the time that you're using to prepare to come to class to succeed. So thank you for that. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, and I will see you in lab.